Hi everyone, this is Yulia Kosarenko at the White channel, and today I will present for you a newly updated and re-recorded version of my previous webinar, Understanding Business Analysis Process. If you would like to know more about me, I'm author of the book Business Analyst, A Profession and a Mindset, and you can always find me at my website whythischange.com or on this YouTube channel. I also have some self-paced video courses for business analysts and for other professionals who want to become business analysts. You can find them by going to courses.whythischange.com. What are we going to talk about today? Today we talk about the process of doing business analysis. We will start with the big million-dollar question: where do requirements come from? We will talk about how do we do business analysis, what are the steps in business analysis process, when does it end, and what are the deliverables of business analysis. So first of all, what is business analysis? It's a practice of analyzing organizations and their functions with the goal of identifying solutions to business problems and business needs. And if you look at it as a little picture, imagine that you start with a problem that you need to solve. You analyze it first. You look at the components of that problem. You try to understand why this problem happens. Then you figure out what solution you need, you synthesize the vision of that solution, you visualize it, and then you can build the actual solution from it. So when we discuss solving business problems and coming up with solutions, we usually imply that some kind of change needs to happen. First, we analyze current state. We look at where organization is now or where a certain process is now. We need to understand the future state. Where does it need to go? And this change, this transition from current state to future state, this is what we analyze, and this is what we need to define requirements for. So you start with analysis of the current state and the business problem that needs to be solved. We determine future state that will satisfy the needs of the business. We determine what needs to change to achieve that. And that what, when we break it down into details, that is what is business requirements. And so if you look at it differently, think about it as current state. We sometimes call it as is state. This is where we have an unresolved problem or business need. Right? We analyze it, we break down the problem, we try to understand why is it happening, what exactly you need, what is it that you're lacking today. Then we try to visualize to be state. Where do you need to be? What does it look like when this problem is resolved? Or what does it look like when this business need is satisfied? This is where we are defining and visualizing the future state. And then we say, well, what do we need to get from here to here? To bridge this gap, we need to build a solution. And that solution usually includes multiple components. These little building blocks of the solution, this is what is requirements. So business requirements are features and capabilities needed to solve a problem or satisfy a business need. Okay, so now we come to the million-dollar question. Where do business requirements come from? And this is where sometimes we have this myth that you gather requirements, that you come to that apple tree and pick the apples from it, or you harvest some other fruits. And that is just a myth, okay? It's not a reality. Requirements are not sitting up there at the tree waiting for us just to be picked. They're not ready to be picked. If you think of an analogy with a business analysis, a much better analogy is an oil refinery. You have this crude oil that needs to be processed, refined, and transformed into something else, into something useful. And this is what business analysis is like. Requirements don't come from business. Requirements come from business analysis. Okay? And we have to just forget the harvesting and think about processing and refining. And business analysis process, just like any process, has phases and stages and activities within. So this is what we will focus on today. We will talk about how do we do business analysis, and this is what you can visualize this process like. You will start with discovery, or you will discover business problems, needs, what are the stakeholders, what's happening in the current state. We'll make some assumptions that will help us to start analysis. Then the actual analysis happens, and then the synthesis of the future state, along with validation, prioritizing, packaging, and structuring. So we will come back to this picture multiple times today, and we will talk about what does this process look like in more detail. But now, why do we even want to talk about the process, right? Why do we need a process? Like, are we being too formal? Are we focusing too much on methodology? So here is where I want to quote something for you, and this is one of my favorite quotes again. If you can't describe what you're doing as a process, you don't know what you're doing. So you really have to understand the activities you need to do, why are you doing them, what's the goal of each activity, and how it will help you move on to the next and the next activity, and eventually to deliver the outcome that you are working for. Let's start with discovery. Why do we need discovery? We need discovery because we can't just come and discover requirements. We can't harvest requirements. We can't come to our stakeholders and tell them, hey, what are your requirements? They probably don't know for sure. They can tell you what their pain points are, what their problems are. So what we want to ask first is, what is the business problem? Or what is it that you need to achieve? What is it you desired? What is your goal? That's where discovery starts from. What do you need to discover? We need to discover, first of all, strategic goals. Why are we doing this? Where do we need to go with this? We want to discover the context of the problem, the situation, the environment. What environment is the company in? What is around this business problem? We need to discover the problem itself. It's not always easy to explain, or sometimes it's not very clear in the beginning. We want to discover who are the stakeholders, who is involved, who will be impacted, who will you need to talk to and conduct analysis with. We want to discover current state, what's going on, what do you need to take into consideration. Constraints, something that may limit your solution or something you cannot change but that will impact you. And maybe discover some artifacts that will be helpful for you to do your analysis. For a little bit more context on starting the project and doing this discovery process, I also have another video called How to Prepare Stakeholders for Business Analysis. Do check it out. It will help you plan this discovery process and plan the initial steps of your analysis, and make sure that stakeholders are there with you, because you're not doing this discovery alone. You're doing it with your group of stakeholders, and you're doing it with others who will provide you with information. So the more you prepare them and the more you help them along, the better cooperation you will have in this process. Moving along, let's just talk about a little bit discovery techniques. Now, I want to make a little disclaimer. I'm using the word discovery here. You may hear different terms for it. You may hear the term current state analysis, artifact analysis, elicitation phase. They all mean similar things. It's initial gathering of information, initial discussions, collecting your understanding of current state. What you can do, what are the techniques you may use? Domain research, understanding the industry better, understanding what's going on in the market, understanding competitors, doing a little bit of research. What are other companies doing? What are the main trends? What are the disruptions in the market? You may be meeting with executive sponsors, stakeholders, top managers to understand what are their goals for this project. You may be doing some of job shadowing and immersion to understand how things are done today. Focus group perhaps with customers if you're looking at a customer-facing problem. Questionnaires and surveys, again, as one of the ways to collect information about current state. Interviews, it could be interviews of particular people in certain roles that can give you additional information, perhaps interviewing experts. And discovering artifacts and collecting them for further analysis. In my other video, Business Analysis Tools and Techniques, I talk a little bit more about some of these techniques. And also I have a video about immersion, and definitely check it out if you've never done immersion or job shadowing. It's an excellent technique during the discovery. Explore it, watch the video, and hopefully you will adopt it. Why are we doing the discovery? What are those outcomes? What are the goals of our discovery? We want to understand the context better, maybe come up with a context model, a visualization of the context for our problem or for our project. What is the who are the stakeholders? You may end up creating a stakeholder matrix to understand better each stakeholder needs and influence and power and interest in what you're doing. That will help you to reach out to them for information and keep them informed and use their expertise for analysis. You probably want to discover customer personas. What do different customers need? How do they differ? Especially again, if you are developing a customer-facing product. You will hopefully discover and will be able to articulate business problem statement. You would think it should be clear when the project is started, but it's not always clear yet. And it's part of your job to help articulate it better and more clearly for everyone. You will likely discover constraints under which you need to operate, or which will limit what you can do in terms of potential solutions. You will discover customer pain points, and here we are talking about internal customers and external customers. Existing artifacts and documentation, collect them. You will likely need to refer to them many times. Survey and interview results, whether they are quantitative or qualitative, and business terminology, right? Business terminology is also important for communication, to avoid miscommunication. And as you're doing this initial discovery, make note of those terms. And if you have any fuzzy or confusing understanding, clarify it with experts so that you use correct terminology. Here is an example of a context model that you may be creating during your discovery process. In this case, an online order processing solution exists in this context. These are all of the different entities that will interact with this solution. So on my internal aspect is a product group who will provide information about products, sales group that will be perhaps processing the orders, and food preparation group that will be preparing the orders that you will be placing online. And in this case, imagine this is a catering company that wants to receive orders online. On the other hand, you will have customers interacting with this system, delivery services that will be delivering the catering orders, and the scheduler that will be scheduling these deliveries. So in this case, I'm discovering different stakeholders or different actors that will be impacted or will need to use this solution. I do have another video about how to create context models. Check it out. I'm using some of the most popular tools, and I will post a link to this video in the description. Moving along, so we've done some discovery. We want to make assumptions. We need to make some assumptions to help us start analysis. It's not possible to start analysis in the vacuum. Just like in science, you start with some hypotheses. In analysis, you also start with some assumptions. You may be doing making assumptions about the project, about the business rules, about the context, outside impacts, perhaps legislation, perhaps company policies, and so on. You will need some assumptions to start analysis. And remember, you will be refining and updating and changing those assumptions as you go. You may discover that you missed something, or you were wrong, or someone will provide new information, or something in your environment, in your business environment, will change and will create a new assumption that now you have to rely on. So this is going to be flexible, but you do need to capture them, documented and updated, and that will help your analysis to be higher quality. Now we are moving on to the actual analysis activities. This is where we've collected all that information during the discovery and we start to analyze it. Of course, we're analyzing as we go, but here is where we really focus on breaking it down and trying to understand everything before we can figure out solutions. So we want to understand how business works in more detail. We want to identify essential components of the business, actors, processes, products, departments, roles, all of those building blocks that you need to understand, and you understand the relationship between them. You will be analyzing and identifying important cause-effect relationships, right? This is where you're looking for root causes. Do I understand business problem? Why is this problem happening? What is the root cause? Or what are all of the causes of this problem? You will here start to isolate what's relevant from what's not relevant. Here are my pertinent facts that I need for my analysis. This is something that's not really needed. I'm going to structure this information. Everything else perhaps looks like I don't need it. Leave it unstructured. Maybe you have some video recordings from meetings or some other data. You will extract what you need out of it. And as one of the outcomes of this, as you're doing this analysis, you will end up figuring out the gaps in your knowledge. Okay, now that I know this, this, and this, I realize that I'm missing another part of it. There is a gap in my knowledge. So you will be pinpointing those knowledge gaps that you also need to fill in, and maybe you'll go back to discovery or ask more questions. But these are the gaps that you need to be addressed in order to make sure you properly understand the problem. What are the techniques of analysis? Artifact analysis. So you're going to analyze those different artifacts and reports and examples that you've collected and analyze and extract important points from them. Immersion, again, here we may do a more in-depth immersion where we will zero in on exceptions, on problems, and we may have some very specific questions that we would bring into this immersion session at this point. Root cause analysis. Modeling, definitely a big part of analysis. Models help us understand current state. They help us pinpoint the problems. They help us highlight essential parts. So definitely analysis without models, probably a little hard to capture. Process analysis. This is where we understand how processes works, what is not working well, what are the bottlenecks, what are the issues, and how to optimize them. Scenario modeling, definitely we may discover multiple scenarios. For example, different types of customers using different types of channels to place their orders at different times. You end up having multiple scenarios, and different scenarios may require different solutions or different behavior. And of course, much more than that. And for example, Babok has about 50 business analysis techniques. So you don't have to learn them all at once, but definitely pick a few and explore them. And again, you can check out my other webinar video called Business Analysis Tools and Techniques. On process analysis, you can also refer to a shorter video I have that just focused on that, and I will provide you with a link in the description. Now, when we're doing this analysis, what are the outcomes? What is it that we want to get out of it? What do we need for our business analysis process to be successful? We need to have a very clear understanding of current state, what is happening, what works, what doesn't work, who does what, why do they do it, what happens now, what happens next. This is all part of our understanding of how business is run. Understanding of the business problem. Do we really understand what do we need to solve? Definition of the root cause. Have we figured out the root cause of the problem? Models of our current state definitely become artifacts of requirements analysis. Identified gaps and hopefully documented gaps. Discovered process deficiencies. Captured business scenarios. And of course more. So all of these are the outcomes that then help us to start defining business requirements for this solution we want to build. Here are some examples of those outcomes of business analysis. Scenario matrix. Imagine we capture here for our online ordering systems different order placement scenarios. So we will have different types of customers: registered, not registered yet, in good standing, which means pay their bills on time, customers that didn't pay their previous bills, etc. And at different times of the day, maybe using different channels like phone, website, SMS. Imagine these customers of different types are trying to place an order. What is supposed to happen in which scenario? What happens if customer that hasn't paid their order in time, for example, goes to website and tries to place a new order? Should they be allowed to do that, or do you want to accept their order or not? So these scenario matrices help you capture different variations, different factors, and how they should influence the outcome. Okay, so let's talk about synthesis. We've analyzed current state, we've figured out the root cause, we have a very good idea about what's happening today. Now you say, okay, what is it we want to achieve? What is this future state? Let's start visualizing this solution, defining solution, and then capturing it using various techniques, capturing your business requirements then. We want to define the future state, again, maybe starting with high level and going down. We want to create shared view of future state, right? At this stage, all of these different stakeholders need to come up to this shared agreement. So it's not just you, business analyst, figuring out what solution should be like. It should be a shared understanding. We want to now capture the details of the future state. So from big picture, let's talk about what specifically you want to be included, and this is business requirements. And to do that, again, we're gonna use different techniques depending on your knowledge and your organization and methodologies used in organization. You definitely want to do some future state modeling. Again, you had created models for current state. Now, what is the future state like? You may use techniques like product breakdown if you're building a new product. User story mapping that helps you structure your requirements using user stories and groups of user stories. A joint application design where a group of people get together and discuss a future design and try to brainstorm it together. Storyboarding, prototyping, so visualizing the future flow. What is user supposed to see? What are the steps that customer will need to follow in this future solution? You're going to be capturing and structuring all these requirements for sharing. And you do that to receive what? So you want to have future state models captured, maybe user experience maps that depict the expectations from user perspective, user story maps that will then help you plan your execution, plan perhaps your iterations. You want to have captured and structured requirements, future process maps if the process needs to change, storyboards and prototypes. So just as a reminder, we don't just capture business requirements as text, as like the written language. There are many components to that. We should combine text with visuals, maybe with some tables, with diagrams, with the structures, so that our requirements are more complete and easier to understand. So here are some examples. You can create a business use case diagram, which at high level will show what are different features that different groups of users want to have in the system. How will they use a future system? There is a video that I will post a link to that is also on my channel about creating use case diagrams, and I also have some free templates. I'll point you to the place where you can download them. So with the synthesis and capturing future requirements, we always have to remember packaging, structuring, because we don't just capture requirements, we need to capture certain structure to make it easier for us to understand what we have, what we don't have, and what is a relationship. So we need to make sure we have some structure to our requirements capturing. We don't want a pile of bricks. We want to visualize, maybe if our solution is a tower like this, we can see from the structure of requirements what is the solution going to be like. So we have different techniques for packaging as well, maybe requirements maps, so user story maps that show you the structure of your user stories and the relationship. Requirement identifiers help you create that unique tag for each requirement. For example, if you're using a requirement management tool, that helps you to cross-reference requirements, that helps you to find them quickly, and it just helps you to be oriented in what you've captured better. Organizing and classifying requirements, so grouping them, maybe giving them tags, grouping them by types or knowing the type of each requirement, grouping user stories under epics and themes, or grouping your detailed requirements under sections in a document, for example, user interface requirements, reporting requirements, etc. Maybe linking your requirements to specific process flows or mapping them to scenarios. Tracking requirements history is very helpful. You may have requirements that are still in a draft format or approved or even obsolete, maybe new versions of requirements. Sometimes it happens with user stories. We create a simple version of a certain functionality and then we develop it, and maybe our older user story is no longer applicable because now we replaced it with a more groomed scenario, and we keep changing and improving it. So knowing which requirements are currently active and who approved them, maybe what was the date, is often helpful, especially on large projects. Cross-referencing, you may be working on a new user story, but it may cross-reference some business rules captured in an earlier user story, or you may be adding another step to a process that was developed earlier. So this cross-referencing really helps to understand the structure of the solution. There are many ways for us to structure and organize requirements and many parameters. We can structure and tag and organize them by the type of requirement. By business area, imagine that you have a complex system where accounting group has their own requirements and procurement group has their own requirements and maybe customer service. So you can also tag and group your requirements by the type of users. By business process, perhaps you have multiple business processes, for example, inventory management, process order, maybe you want to do warranty service, collect customer feedback. Each of these processes may have a sequence of requirements and user stories linked to them. Maybe by use cases, if that's the methodology you're using. And different ways to do product breakdown, capture product breakdown structure also help you to do that organizing. Definitely try, especially if you use tools, to assign unique identifiers to your requirements, versions, dates, again, whatever helps to know what's current, and cross-reference related requirements or anything where there is a dependency or a certain sequence is required. Because again, without it, you're just going to have that pile of bricks and that's not working. So here is an example of a user story map. Imagine you have, for a certain persona that has a goal, you try to define the whole user journey. So if my persona is a new customer that wants to create an account to become, to be able to order my product online, maybe my goal is to create a customer account. That's my journey. And my journey consists of several steps. What are the major steps that customer needs to go through to have their account created? We can break it down into various activities. We're creating basically a backbone of this user journey. And then for each of these activities, as we keep breaking it down, we may end up with multiple user stories that together describe how this activity needs to be implemented, what needs to happen. So we may end up with multiple user stories. And this is really like functional decomposition. And in a user story map, you can arrange it visually like that, so it looks a little bit hierarchical. And your horizontal layers can represent different releases. So this way you can define what minimum functionality you want to fit into release 1. For example, you want to implement this user journey in its simplest form, and these are the user stories that will together make up that first release, and then the next and the next. So this is can be a planning tool as well, and this also shows you the structure of your user stories, and it helps you see the relevance of different stories and determine if you need to move things around, what can move, what needs to stay, and what is the overall sequence. Now let's talk about validation. So we're gathering information, we are translating it into requirements, we articulate those requirements. Validation is crucial here. We want to constantly be checking, are we doing it right? Does it make sense? We never want to be in this situation that is depicted on this cartoon where the customer doesn't get to see the requirements. Business analyst is just working along and doesn't want to confuse anybody and says, okay, I'm going to show you everything when I'm done. And when they're done, the customer may not even recognize it because, these are two human beings. The analyst may have their own perception of what they think they're learning. The customer may not have always expressed them well. There may have been misunderstandings and gaps. Without that constant and frequent validation, these things can go in completely different directions. So always remember that the most important outcome of business analysis is shared understanding of requirements by all stakeholders. So to achieve this shared understanding, we need to validate as we go all the time. How do we validate? What are the strategies we can use? We want to track requirements or user stories in a shared repository. It needs to be always accessible to others. Don't hide them, don't put them in some secret folder. Keep them shared so that anyone can go and look at any time, and this is how you will encourage this feedback and validation in little increments, which is much easier and more realistic to achieve. Do ongoing requirement reviews between meetings. If you have 2 requirement workshops a week, review what you captured in the first one before you get to the second meeting. Ask people to review just specific user stories. Clarify yourself. Flag if there is anything missing. Ask someone to go and find additional information. Recap maybe at the beginning of the next meeting. Make sure you're validating between meetings, and when you start the next one, then hopefully whatever you discussed in the previous meeting is basically fully validated, right? Requirement walkthroughs. This is a traditional method of requirements validation, which unfortunately didn't always work, especially if we had this big huge meeting for a whole day or sometimes even multiple days, and everyone was supposed to read a 100-page document beforehand. Most of the time it didn't work well because people are not good at reading long documents and sitting in long walkthroughs. But we can use this differently. We can do smaller requirement walkthroughs, perhaps twice a month or every week, depends on your project, where we review together everyone's feedback. Ideally, everyone is reviewing it beforehand and then they discuss their feedback together. Design reviews is another method that sometimes gets missed. As you put together your requirements, it's always a good idea to review it with your design team or your development team, because you will need to explain requirements to them later, and they need to translate it into design, but they can already provide you with feedback at the requirement stage, and they should, because you may be missing something important. They may ask you additional questions. You may be visualizing something that is completely not feasible, or maybe it doesn't make sense, or maybe they can give you some pointers. And they may ask clarifying questions that will point to gaps in your knowledge or in your understanding of business problem. So always try to review requirements even before they're complete with the design teams, and the same with quality assurance teams. They can point gaps in your requirements or potential issues or potential defects even before development is done, just by reviewing your requirements. So definitely use expertise of your design, development, and quality assurance teams to help you achieve better requirements. Validation often goes along with prioritizing. So you validated requirements, everyone seems to agree. What is the value of each requirement? How important is it? We have to prioritize because not everything can get done. It's not possible. So we want to determine either business value or priority, or use a must-have, not nice to have, should have. Whatever method you use, as long as you agree that that's what your project will follow, that's fine. The simplest one is just mandatory and optional. That's the most basic prioritization. Mandatory things need to get done. Optional only get done if there are resources left. A little bit more granular version is 3-level, where you have mandatory, important, and nice to have. And again, there's different ways to call them. Critical, valuable, desirable, or mandatory, called comprise minimum viable product. Important requirements comprise core product, and nice to haves enhanced product. You can pick any of these schemes as long as everyone agrees to use it. There are more granular ways to prioritize. It's often used in Scrum methodology, using business value, numeric business value that can range from 0 to 100 or even higher, often using Fibonacci sequence. And that helps you define something that is very important, for example, with a value of 100 versus just average, medium with value of 20, and with other user stories that are much less valuable, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So just make sure that you have a system that everyone agrees to follow and prioritize. Now we talked about these different phases of the process. Now we just have to go back to that linear sequence that we said is not always going to be linear. The key here is that discovery usually comes first, right? You cannot do your assumptions and analysis without having done some discovery. You need assumptions to be foundation of analysis. You shouldn't be doing any synthesis before you've done some analysis. But you may be circling back and forth. You may be iterating. As you've started to do your analysis after your initial discovery, you discover gaps and you go back to the discovery stage to gather more information. So that may be your analysis cycle. As you start synthesizing, you will be prioritizing and then maybe going back and modifying things based on the priority you've defined. As you start validating, you may discover that you got something wrong and you may need to go back to analysis, right? So these iterations are a normal part of analysis. In iterative methodologies, often you do discovery up front and then you do analysis of a group of requirements, you synthesize, validate, prioritize, and then as this moves forward for execution, you go back and you do more detailed analysis for the next iteration and next iteration. So the actual process will vary based on your methodology and how your team works and how your organization works, but these phases still exist in one shape or form or another. And now I want to ask you a very crucial question, because sometimes, especially when junior business analysts start their job, they think that as business analysis phase is done, or there is a certain requirement signed off point, that they're going to be done with the project and then someone else will deal with the rest. But that's not necessarily so. So if I ask you this question, when does business analysis end? What do you think? When does it end? For example, does it end when requirements are documented? Does it end when requirements document is signed off, if you follow this methodology? Does it end when you have a complete requirements package and it's sent to technology teams or to your vendor? Are you done then? When your official requirements analysis phase, as it was defined in the project plan, has ended, so you're past the date, or when the project manager tells business analysts you're not needed anymore, you're good to go back to your department and you can move on to the next project. Not really, right? Not really, because you are not done until much later. Business analysis does not end until, first of all, stakeholders have reached a shared understanding of requirements. Sometimes it takes a while, and then people keep coming back and reassessing their requirements. It's part of your goal to create that shared understanding. It doesn't end until requirements are clear to the solution team. So the team that will be developing solution needs to be clear what they need to develop. You may have sent them the document. It doesn't mean they reviewed it yet. It doesn't mean that they're clear yet. You have to make sure they understand it. Solution design must be validated against requirements. So as the solution team is coming up with a design, deviations may happen. So business analyst will be checking and confirming and validating that their understanding is correctly reflected in the design. Requirements should also be clear to the quality assurance team. So at some point, business analysts may need to review and walk through requirements and answer all the questions of the quality assurance group, because they want to understand requirements in order to come up with the correct test strategy and test plan. And business analysts play a role in reviewing that and validating it. And well, guess what? You still may be involved as solution is being designed and tested, because it's never a straightforward and linear process. And of course, especially when we use more of an agile methodology where business analysts are involved and the design and development is done in small increments. And honestly and finally, you are not done until the change is implemented successfully and your user adoption is on the way. You can play a crucial role in implementation and training and final project communications, change communications, and support user adoption, because the successful solution is the solution that users, the intended users, are using. They have accepted it, adopted it, and they're using it. That's a success, right? So what are your deliverables from business analysis process? First of all, it's documented business requirements, documented, so you can find them, you can read them. Artifacts that structure and capture requirements, documents, spreadsheets, diagrams, requirements management tools. You have all those pictures and models, so visual part. User acceptance criteria often become part of this outcome, especially as you capture requirements as user stories with users acceptance criteria. And the most important outcome is something that is a little bit harder to visualize and see, is shared understanding of business requirements by all stakeholders. That shared understanding is your ultimate goal. And with that, I just want to start wrapping up this webinar and remind you of the business analyst mindset that we want to always refer to and use as we are doing business analysis, as we are working with our stakeholders, trying to understand the problem and doing all of our business analysis activities. Refer to that. I have a free download on my website as well. It's based on the book Business Analyst, a Profession and a Mindset. And remember that you are part of the solution. You take responsibility for shared understanding of business requirements. You will encounter human beings and you will need to know how to deal with them. That's all part of that BE mindset that helps us to help business to do better and to solve their problems and to make customers happy and make their business more efficient. So to wrap it up, just again a reminder, there are many resources out there, books, websites, blogs, professional organization websites. Do your homework, find resources that you like, that work for you, use them to be more successful. You can always check the courses on my website, courses.y-change.com. There are courses here for professionals changing careers, an interview crash course, and there are also some video lessons that you can enroll in and hopefully complement your knowledge. You can find some downloads if you go to shop.y-change.com, downloads of some handouts that I offer to just help you with those activities. And I hope that this video was helpful. Thank you for taking time to watch it. All the best in your business analysis activities, whether your job is a business analyst or not, doesn't matter as much as long as you are doing business analysis. You can use what you've learned in this video. So thank you for your time, and until next video, bye-bye. I'm Yulia. Take care.